Hello, welcome to Planet America's Off the Planet, with all of the extra bits, bonus stories and interviews that we didn't have time to put on the air. But I am still John Barron.
Hi, let me check. Yep, I'm still Chaz Licciardello.
There is so much going on, Chaz. We started talking on the show about all of the various legal woes confronting Donald Trump and the Trump organization and the Trump children and whoever it was that packed Trump's suitcases and boxes when he left the Oval Office and may have broken lots and lots of laws by putting lots of mementos into the basement at Mar-a-Lago. How serious is this, do you think?
Well, I think he pretty clearly broke the law. I think that much is pretty, and his defences are unconvincing, to say the least. Like the classification one is irrelevant to what he's been potentially charged with. He's pretty much admitted that he knew he had the documents, like by saying that oh yeah, I had them, but they were classified. Yeah. No one's suggesting they were actually planted. Like no one with who's going.
But there's classified and there's classified in that it sounds as though he's, some of those famous love letters between him and Kim Jong-un, that he's got some handwritten letters from Kim Jong-un. Yeah. Now, he may have been thinking, well, he wrote them to me personally, I would like to keep them, or I might put them on display, or I might sell them on eBay, whatever he was thinking he was going to do with them. But it's not necessarily as though that has, kind of the nuclear codes on them. So that can be classified and not really matter that much. That's true.
But the fact is that if that was if that was the only issue, then I suggested they'd have a very weak case. But what I was going to say is we don't actually even know how bad the situation is. If I was the Department of Justice, the very first thing I'm doing is raiding Trump Tower, because if he had all these documents lying around in desk drawers at Mar-a-Lago, who knows where else he's got documents? The first thing I need to know is to know just how bad the situation is before they decide they want to lay charges.
Should Trump be held responsible if he recklessly, took a bunch of classified material, had it at Mar-a-Lago, where it seems anybody with $250,000 can buy themselves a membership, and frankly, if hostile intelligence agencies haven't infiltrated the cleaning staff and the catering staff at Mar-a-Lago to be going around there with their feather duster going, oh, that's a nice letter, isn't it? I mean, surely that sort of stuff is probably going on, but is that Trump's fault if it is? Because it's not as though he's giving the secrets away.
Look, whether you want to blame him or not is not an issue. The issue is the law. Right? What is against the law and what do you want to charge people with? And like I said on the show, the main show, even if you think you've got him, that doesn't necessarily mean you want to indict him, because there are good reasons why you might not want to indict him. For instance, you might not want to continue a cycle of escalation that's going on in American politics at the moment. You might be scared that there will be retribution down the road. If you indict Trump, then the very first thing they're going to do is, the Republicans do when they're in power, is try and find a way to indict Joe Biden. And so we go on our way to a third world country as people just tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat. So there are reasons why you wouldn't want to indict, even if you think you got him. Speaking for myself, I don't think I would indict him for actual legal reasons, because even though I do think he probably broke the law...
Isn't that the only way you can indict somebody is for legal reasons?
Well, what I'm saying is, even though I think it's almost certain that Trump broke the law, I'm not sure they can prove it. Now you might go, hang on, what are you talking about? Yeah. they found the documents. Yeah. There's no doubt he had the documents. But if you look at the three laws that they've charged him under, all three of them have something in common. They require intent. And when I say intent, not just intent to have the documents, but intent that you meant to take them unlawfully, thinking that they're not yours. Now, Trump has already expressed some unconvincing defences. One he hasn't expressed at all, but I think is actually the most convincing defence, is I thought I had the right to them. Yeah. These people who are asking me for those documents, well, they can bugger off. I'm the ex-president. I should be able to have these documents. Yeah. If he's genuinely thought that, genuinely believed that he had the right to those documents, he's not guilty.
Yeah, so it may come down to what previous communications happened when they went and picked up a bunch of boxes back in January, and then when again in June there were discussions between that Trump was apparently personally involved with, as well as his lawyers, to clarify exactly what would be covered by the Presidential Records Act.
And, so that's... Did he believe them?
did Trump believe them?
Yes, like
Well,
they might have told him all they like, but that doesn't mean he believed them.
Well, so this then comes down to, was what Trump was doing with the election was that treason or not? It's kind of echoing the arguments around, should he have been impeached because, well, he genuinely believed that there was voter fraud, even though the experts said no, there's not. He genuinely believed it, so he gets off the hook. I'm not sure that he gets away with that trick again, particularly given that the Justice Department is meant not to make political calculations, except for their rule of don't drop anything big within 50 days of an election. That's pretty reasonable of them. But Merrick Garland, in getting that warrant to get the FBI to search Mar-a-Lago, they had to be pretty sure that a criminal act had been committed, and that instead of just making another appointment to go back, as they had a couple of times already, that they essentially just barged their way in one morning. That says to me that a crime has been committed and they're looking for evidence to support potential charges.
Look, I think, like I said, I think a crime has been committed, and I think they had good reason to think a crime has been committed, but that's not the question. The question is, can you convince a jury?
Yeah.
Like, I think, and look, I agree with you that it's a massive cop-out for Trump to consistently seemingly break laws and then go, but I thought everything was fine. It was almost like a stubbornness defence or unfair, harsh people would say a mental illness defence or a senility defence. If you just don't believe anything that's at all reasonable, you can just get away with it. I agree that that's not right. But the bottom line is you need 12 jurors to say guilty.
Yeah.
He's going to come up against 12 jurors in the end. And if you're Merrick Garland, the worst case scenario is to have America descend into a morass of political retribution and everything, and have all the negatives of charging him, but you don't actually get a guilty verdict. That's the worst case scenario, right? Yeah. So ask yourself, in the end, there's 12 people. What are the chances that one of them isn't going to be Republican? What's the chances that one of them is not going to be a person who wants to avoid a civil war? What's the chance that one of them isn't going to be a person going, you know what, this has gone too far. Let's stop persecuting people for political reasons, etc. Like, it just takes one of them to find any excuse to let them off. And I've just given you an excuse to let them off. So I think it's very hard to see a guilty verdict, even if it seems really obvious. And that's why, if I was Merrick Garland, I wouldn't open the Pandora's box. But, people say I'm soft.
Yeah. Now, we also talked in Planet America about immigration.
Yes.
And the continuing number of border interceptions, as well as the estimated numbers of undocumented arrivals being in the millions now.
Yeah.
But this has taken on a very political element as well, because successive presidents and Congresses talk about comprehensive immigration reform, and they never quite get around to doing it, in part because both sides like the politics of it.
They really do. There was an opportunity about 10 years ago, in fact, almost exactly 10 years ago, where they could have had comprehensive immigration reform where they, first of all, created paths for citizenship for people who've been there for 20 years, who were basically part of the community anyway, whose kids were born in America, etc. And they could have tightened up the border at the same time for enforcement, etc. And they chose not to do that. Both sides thought they could win that argument. I don't think anyone's won the argument. I think the situation's gone a lot worse. I think part of the problem is that there are two different crises at the moment. There's a question that's asked, is it a crisis? I think there are two crises. I think there's a crisis in the number of people coming through, and there's a second crisis on what you do with them when they're there. They are two different issues. And by the way, I don't think the fact there's 2.5 million people at the border necessarily means that it's out of control, because those people are talking to the Border Patrol. Like I said in the main show, that's still a secure border. But you can see how these two crises, it allows people to talk past each other. Let me give you an example. This is Kamala Harris being interviewed by Chuck Todd.
Would you call the border secure?
I think that there is no question that we have to do what the President and I asked Congress to do. Is the first request we made. Pass a bill to create a pathway to citizenship. The border is secure, but we also have a broken immigration system, in particular over the last 4 years before we came in, and it needs to be fixed.
We're going to have 2 million people cross this border for the first time ever. You're confident this border is secure?
we have a secure border, in that is a priority for any nation, including ours and our administration. But there are still a lot of problems that we are trying to fix, given the deterioration that happened over the last 4 years. We also have to put in place a law and a plan for a pathway for citizenship.
Okay, so once again, Chuck Todd is doing the thing. It's not a secure border because there's 2 million people. Actually, no, they talk to the Border Patrol. It is secure. But Kamala Harris is responding by saying, yeah, we'll solve the problem of the people outside coming in by solving the problem of the people who are already here. But that's not how it works. If you have a path to citizenship, it actually probably encourages more people to come because they think there'll be a path to citizenship at the end. So solving one problem actually makes the other problem worse, which is why this is such a complicated issue. But but they've definitely got a problem. There is no doubt about that.
Yep.
There are 500,000 people, I didn't mention this in the show, there are 500,000 people who get past the Border Patrol. That's why this issue is not, that's why the border is not secure, because the 500,000 people who no one knows about. There were 78 people who were apprehended who were on the terrorist database in the last year. So how many people how many of that 500,000 were also on the terrorist database that we don't know? We just don't know.
Yeah.
Can I just say one thing that's rubbish before we move on to whatever you had to say? Because they always bring up fentanyl. That's something that conservatives like to talk about. Oh, there's record numbers of fentanyl coming through. 85% of the fentanyl that's intercepted at the border is done at checkpoints from just normal people. It's not mules, like it's actually just people which carry fentanyl around. You don't need to get fentanyl from Mexico. You can make it synthetically anywhere. You know, Walter White can make fentanyl. Anyone can make fentanyl.
Yep.
So the immigration issue has got nothing to do really with the drug overdose issue. That's another problem. That's a third crisis.
Yep.
Sorry, what are you about to say?
No, so I'm interested in the politics around one of the ways of managing large numbers of border arrivals.
Yeah.
Is not just to leave the entire burden on border states like Texas and Arizona and California. So they've been for years sending people interstate to non-border states for processing, waiting hearing dates and so on. But in the last couple of weeks, we've seen this ramped up where Greg Abbott in Texas and Ron DeSantis in Florida have been sending people to, in one case, Martha's Vineyard, of all places.
And Greg Abbott sent it to Kamala Harris's house in Washington D.C.
Right. So these are clearly political stunts and done without any coordination, so that when these people get off the plane or get off the bus at the other end, there aren't the officials, the aid workers, the social workers, etc., to deal with them to help them on their way. So these people are being used as pawns now. It seems, because both Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott are running for re-election as governors of their states, but both of them have also got half an eye on possibly running for president in 2024 as Republican candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, they're definitely political stunts, because if they weren't, they'd tell them beforehand they were sending. Because at the same time I actually think the southern governors have a fair point. Not Ron DeSantis, because Florida is not an illegal immigration issue. Texas is. Right? Greg Abbott, I think, has a fair point that they take millions of unauthorised or undocumented migrants per year. And the northern states say, hey, we're really pro this is great, no problems. But they're not the ones who take them. It's Texas and Arizona in particular, and New Mexico, who take them. And so by Greg Abbott sending them to Chicago or New York or whatever, he's trying to raise attention to say, well, why don't you guys take a few as well? I actually think that point is fair. And I think spreading them around America is a reasonable thing to do. Sure. But the stunts, that's not one of those examples. Doug Ducey, who no one ever talks about, from Arizona, at the same time he's actually sending migrants to New York and Washington, but he's arranging it with them beforehand. So he's not pulling a stunt. He's actually he's just trying to actually make the situation better. And he doesn't get in the news because he's not pulling a massive political stunt. But he at least is being responsible, and for that he gets rewarded by being ignored. Yeah, and
Ron DeSantis, on the other hand, is showing that he has this sort of Trump-like ability to trigger liberals, so that he's creating the situation where people of goodwill and humanitarian intent are meeting these asylum seekers, in the case of those that went to Martha's Vineyard, and hugging them and giving them free stuff and housing them and all this kind of stuff, which is exactly what Ron DeSantis is wanting, and they're threatening to launch legal action against him, which is exactly what Ron DeSantis is wanting, because in Florida and elsewhere in the South, they just go, well, see, there's the problem. Those people in those northern states, they're a bunch of, I don't know, illegal immigrant huggers.
Yeah.
This is what they want. They want open borders.
And he wants Democrats to hate him, because if he's running against Trump to be the Republican nominee, the person who angers the Democrats the most is probably going to be
the
liked.
biggest boogeyman win.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
so this works for him, even though polling-wise, I don't think it's very good in Florida. I think 29% of Americans said it was okay for state officials to fly or bus migrants to other states. It doesn't poll well, but it still suits his purposes, I feel.
Yeah.
I was just going to say leaving aside the politics of this, one thing which I don't think gets discussed much at all is that one easy way that you could not solve the problem, but at least make it a bit better, is to take a few more immigrants and refugees, because a lot of these people think they've got no other method of getting to America. And they're right. Joe Biden, people talk about Trump, Joe Biden's been terrible with refugees. So far this year, there's like a month to go in the fiscal year, they've taken like 10,000 refugees. They were taking 140,000 refugees under Obama, right? So if there was a method that they could actually take Venezuelan, Cuban and Nicaraguan refugees, then they might actually come in a legitimate way rather than just in this haphazard way which creates all these problems. So it just seems to me, I'm not saying, the answer is just to take more, but I'm saying that would help.
Yeah.
If there was a proper process, it would help.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about the situation in Ukraine at the moment. Continuing escalation in recent weeks after a major counter-offensive from the Ukrainians, a series of military setbacks for the Russians. President Vladimir Putin this week announced a partial mobilisation of at least 300,000 potential reserve forces personnel, while again raising the spectre of a possible nuclear conflict. Now, Russia is at the same time pushing ahead with a series of referendums in the occupied areas of Ukraine ahead of the expected annexation of parts of that country's east. The United States has reportedly been warning Russia against the possible use of tactical nuclear weapons, sending messages to Moscow of unspecified but grave consequences. Now, this mobilisation itself carries significant risks for Vladimir Putin. Thousands of service-aged Russians have been fleeing the country to try and avoid fighting, and the West says these referendums are basically a sham and they won't recognise any move to incorporate Ukrainian territory into Russia. Here's what Joe Biden had to say at the UN General Assembly this week.
This war is about extinguishing Ukraine's right to exist as a state. Plain and simple. That should make your blood run cold.
Now, the politics of this are always interesting. Famously, of course, Americans will argue that you don't ever win an election based on foreign policy, but as we saw last year from the hasty withdrawal from Afghanistan, if you get it wrong, then your poll numbers will suffer dramatically. That's where Joe Biden went from being above 50% approval down into the low 40s and into the 30s in the last 6 months or so. So far, it seems as though the strategy of aiding and arming Ukraine is working for Biden, and the NATO alliance is looking much stronger than it did under Donald Trump. But clearly, this has got the potential to be a major wild card. They talk about October surprises leading up to elections. Something goes badly wrong in Ukraine and Biden is still saying, well, we're not going to provide them with longer range missiles and we're not going to provide them with the aircraft that Zelensky is asking for. Then suddenly Biden looks like the bad guy. Yeah,
it is reaching ahead, I feel. In that at the moment, Putin appears to be trying to put as much pressure on the West as he possibly can. They're only just this week they've had some sham referendums that they presumably Russia will then use to annex some of the territories in Ukraine that they want to have on top of. They want to be on top of and have control of. And Putin explicitly gave in one of his speeches, said, if you mess with our territory, and he then implied he would respond potentially with nuclear weapons.
Right, so the nuclear deterrent now extends into Ukraine itself rather than just what we recognise as Russia. So that could be the excuse that he needs to use short-range tactical weapons.
Exactly, and that's not me saying he's going to use nuclear weapons. That's me saying he's trying to ramp up pressure right now.
Yeah,
okay?
which is a disincentive to the Ukrainians to re-invade the east of their own country because there's this sort of dodgy legal framework now for responding in a massive fashion.
Exactly. So if he's doing that, if he's gone to those lengths, what else may he be doing at the moment? Because the mobilisation you just referred to, not working. They're mobilising racial minorities. They're mobilising poor people. They're mobilising prisoners. There's huge amounts of dissent, and it's terrible for morale. And so that's not going to, and it's going to take them months to get to the front line anyway. Ukraine is still making progress. So this is not working for Putin right now, which means he's probably going to try to do something else, try and ramp up the pressure in some other way. Maybe by attacking supply lines, or maybe by attacking power stations or something like that. Whatever it is, whatever the next thing is going to place more pressure on Biden. How much do you want to get involved? How much do you want Russia to be thinking, this is not Ukraine versus Russia, this is NATO versus Russia, because then you get into dicey territory.
Yeah, and those 300,000, and among them are, guys in their 50s and 60s who fought in Afghanistan in the 80s and Chechnya 15, 20 years ago. These are people that are unfamiliar with a lot of the weapons that the Russians now use, but
Whatever's left over. Yeah.
So they're not well trained, they're not well armed, but in 3 weeks from now they could find that 150,000 of them have been plopped into Donetsk or Luhansk, and they could possibly form a quite a reasonable occupying army just through sheer numbers. They don't actually have to engage into frontline conflict, but they are just there almost as a policing presence to support the Russian-backed separatists who are there, etc., and just say, right, we're now here, we're redrawing the map on this side of the river. That looks as though this is where this may be heading in the short to medium term, but it's going to be fascinating to see.
It will.
Yeah. Now, in the broadcast of Planet America, we spoke to Democratic pollster Celinda Lake. This week we also spoke to Republican political consultant Whit Ayres, and I began by asking him for his views as to what were the key issues driving the election right now, given that Republicans 6 months ago really thought they had a big shot of winning both houses of Congress, and now it looks as though, well, the Senate could be a bridge too far, and the House may even be hard for them to wrestle away at this stage. Here's what he had to say. Whit Ayres, welcome back to Planet America.
Thanks. Good to be with you.
So 6 months ago, Republicans were looking at a potential red wave this November. The polls now suggest that is not the case. What are the issues driving that turnaround in the polls?
There's several factors that have changed the environment. The most important one was the Dobbs decision of the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade in June. That has energized a lot of Democrats, particularly younger women. There are a number of younger women who didn't think politics mattered that much, and the Dobbs decision has shown them that it has. It hasn't given the Democrats an advantage in enthusiasm, but it has leveled the playing field where now Democrats are as enthusiastic to vote as Republicans. But there's several other factors as well. Donald Trump has been very prominent in the news, particularly after the FBI raid on his home in August. The best case for Republicans is to make the midterm elections a referendum on the governance of the Biden administration. But with Donald Trump being so visible, it makes it easier for the Democrats to define the midterm election as a choice between a Biden future and a Trump future. And that helps the Democrats. And primaries, Republican primaries, have elevated some first-time candidates who may not be as strong as more experienced candidates would have been. There's also a slight decline in gas prices, which have helped the Democrats, although overall inflation has not moderated yet, and that's a weakness for them.
Pew polling suggests that a much higher rate of somewhat disapprovers of Joe Biden intend to vote for Democrats than somewhat disapprovers usually intend to vote for the president's party. Why do you think that is?
I think that's because of the alternative that is presented out there with Donald Trump. There are a number of people who are fairly tentative on the Biden administration leadership, but they really don't want a Donald Trump future brought to America. So I think that's the best explanation for the more temperate Biden supporters still deciding to vote for Democrats.
Whit, you tactfully referred to inexperienced candidates there. I wonder, some of the sort of more Trumpy inexperienced candidates, ones that the former president endorsed, such as his old football-playing friend Herschel Walker, TV doctor Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania. How much of a drag on Republican prospects, particularly in the Senate, is that candidate quality issue?
John, I need to say that half the people in my office are dyed-in-the-wool Georgia Bulldogs who think Herschel Walker is the greatest thing who ever lived because he brought them a national championship. So I cannot say a negative word about Herschel Walker, or I will not be able to go back into my office. Let's just say that all of us, when we try to do something difficult, tend to be better at it after we've done it a few times than doing it the first time. And there are a number of Senate candidates who have never run for office before, who have never experienced extraordinary pressure of a high-profile political race. And they're not likely to do as well as they would do in a second or third or fourth campaign.
How much of a concern should it be for Democrats how close the polling seems to be in those Midwestern states, like, say, Wisconsin, where the polling in 2016 and 2020 so overfavored Democrats in the end?
There's no question that polling in 2016 and 2020 underestimated the support for Donald Trump and for Republican candidates. That's a function, we think, of Trump voters simply being unwilling to talk to pollsters. But the more comparable election is 2018, the other midterm election before this one, when our polling was dead on and most polling was much more accurate than it was in 2016 and 2020. So my guess is that the polls right now are fairly accurate, and there are a lot of polls that are very close because we have a very evenly divided country.
And with potentially so many very close contests in the House and the Senate, are you at all worried that some of those Trump-backed candidates are going to emulate Donald Trump? And if it is close, they're going to say they were robbed, voter fraud, stole the election.
Well, that could happen, unfortunately, John. The peaceful transfer of power in a democracy is a foundational cornerstone of a democratic political system. And failing to acknowledge a loss and continuing to argue that any loss was a result of fraud is a real threat to the future of our democracy. I'm concerned about it, and I hope it doesn't happen. But we have an example of it happening at the top, and I'm afraid there may be some other Republican candidates who'll be tempted to follow along.
Now, you mentioned that Trump supporters were quite quiet to pollsters in 2016, not so much in 2018. I'd like to quote to you Robert Calais from Trafalgar, what he had to say about this year. I quote, "Biden's pursuit of and attacks on MAGA Republicans has created an army of voters who will be virtually impossible to poll and more difficult still to estimate. The 2022 Republican turnout will likely be higher than any of the polls or models are showing." Do you agree with that sentiment?
I don't know that there's any evidence of that. That's the hope of Republicans, certainly. But I do think that Donald Trump was a very visible presence in 2018, but he wasn't on the ballot in 2018, and he won't be on the ballot in 2022. So I believe that 2018 is the better model, although there's no question that attacks on Donald Trump energize his supporters and make him stronger within the Republican Party.
And when it comes to Trump-endorsed candidates, obviously we don't yet know how they're going to perform in November, but based on how they performed through the primaries to get this far, what does that say to you about Donald Trump's influence on the modern-day Republican Party now?
Donald Trump is still the single most influential person in the Republican Party. He remains very influential, especially in Republican primaries where there's no Republican incumbent. In areas where you have a popular Republican incumbent like Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, they have performed very well, and they have beaten back Trump-endorsed opponents. But in primaries where there are multiple candidates, none of them have a particularly high name recognition, a Donald Trump endorsement has been very, very significant. And he remains a major force in the Republican Party.
Whit, Democrats seem to be doing increasingly well amongst white college-educated voters, whereas Republicans seem to be doing increasingly well amongst white working-class voters. Does this give the Democrats an edge in the midterms because college-educated voters tend to turn out more in midterms?
Well, not necessarily, because there are more non-college educated voters in America than there are college educated voters, by about 60 to 40%. So there are far more non-college educated voters to appeal to. So I don't know that the differential turnout between college and non-college educated necessarily gives advantage to a Democrat.
Are there any other sort of significant demographic shifts that you're seeing during this election cycle? Or does the kind of confounding and confusing element that is Donald Trump kind of scramble all of that so it's hard to extract too much big picture stuff?
Well, certainly Trump is a confounding and scrambling element, but no one has repealed the demographic trends going on in the United States. And that's a declining proportion of white voters and an increasing proportion of non-white voters, particularly Hispanics. Some of the best news out of the 2020 election was Republicans doing better among the growing group of Hispanic voters, particularly in places in Florida and along the border in Texas. So I think it's imperative, if Republicans are going to be competitive in the future, that they continue to gain among Hispanic voters. And there is some evidence that that is actually happening.
Well, have we got to the stage where there's no point even referring to Latino voters as a coherent voting bloc? Because their behaviour varies so much across America when it comes to voting.
There's no question that Hispanics are not one consolidated group. It makes a lot of difference, their country of origin, whether it's Cuba or Venezuela or Mexico. And they have many different concerns and many of those concerns they share with the rest of white America, like jobs and the economy and being free of crime. But it still has enough unifying elements in the Hispanic community to think about them as a particular voting group, sort of like African Americans in this country. So there's great variety among African Americans, there's great variety among Hispanics, but it's still a very important and significant demographic group in our politics.
With according to Gallup, 85% of people are happy with the way things are going in their personal lives, whereas 17% are happy with the direction of the country. How does that apparent contradiction affect voting behaviour?
Well, it's interesting because what you said is exactly right. While people think things are going well in their own lives, they don't think they're going well with the country. And that's a function of our polarization, our social media that continues to feed vitriol and anger into the body politic. And the way it works in the political life right now is that it tends to have people vote against the party in power, which of course at this point are the Democrats. So that's one of the major challenges the Democrats have, is that so many people feel like the country is going the wrong direction and they're the ones in charge.
Of all the late events that can affect the vote the last second, like say gas price hikes or interest rate rises or some event in Trump's legal cases or some kind of abortion ruling or something, so all those kinds of things, what would be the thing that politicos would be most worried about dropping in the last couple of days?
I think the great unknown out there is what's going to happen with many of these cases about Donald Trump. I don't think the Department of Justice is likely to indict him before the election because they have a general rule that says they don't do anything within 60 days of an election that could affect the outcome. But that doesn't affect the prosecutor in Fulton County, Georgia, who has an ongoing case involving the effort to find 11,780 votes on Trump's behalf in 2020 in Georgia, nor does it affect some of the various steps regarding the classified documents that the FBI found at Mar-a-Lago. So I do think there are a number of unknowns out there regarding the whole Trump environment and Trump himself that could affect the outcome of the election, both helping Republicans or helping Democrats. And we just don't know how those are going to turn out right now.
Finally, Whit Ayres, having run presidential campaigns yourself, consulted to a lot of Republican presidential candidates over the years, what do you think the thinking is for other potential 2024 candidates? On the one hand, Donald Trump is overwhelmingly the favourite in the polls, but he's also facing a whole bunch of legal jeopardy that could stop him in his tracks. So what are the rest of those candidates thinking right now?
Well, I don't think they're taking much of a bet about where Trump will be because they don't know and nobody knows. But it's important to understand the divisions within the Republican Party right now. About 10% of the party are never Trump people. They've disapproved of his job performance. They've never voted for him. They're never going to vote for him again. About 40% are always Trump people. They voted for him. They strongly approve of the job performance that he did while he was in office. They will walk through a wall of flame for him. They will brook no dissent. And anyone who criticizes Donald Trump gets their wrath. They will come after them. About 50% of the party are maybe Trump voters. These are people who voted for him twice. They approved of his job performance, but they're just not sure they want to go back to all the drama and the tension that it created with their family and friends. So they're open to looking for another candidate who might do some of the things they like, but who doesn't carry as much baggage as Donald Trump. They would vote for Donald Trump in a heartbeat again against Joe Biden, but they're at least open to considering other people. And it depends upon which other candidates emerge as alternatives to Trump that will determine how they vote.
Whit Ayres, always great to get your insights. Thank you for being with us on Planet America.
My pleasure.
Whit Ayres, it's like a broadcast from a gentler time, isn't it?
He certainly is old school. Great guy.
Yes. One of the major issues with polling at the moment and the midterms is how much of an impact abortion is going to have. Yeah. Like we've talked about this, that I think people universally agree that the issue of abortion since the Supreme Court ruling on Dobbs has gotten Democrats back in the game in terms of being energised, because they weren't very energised beforehand. And midterms are a lot about energy because you don't have to turn up to vote. A lot of people don't care about the midterms. So if you're energised, it could make a big difference.
Yeah, you get turnout often in the sort of the high 20%, 30%, whereas in a presidential it's low to mid 60s. Yeah. So about half as many people vote in the midterms as they do for the presidency.
Yeah. So the question is, does the issue of abortion translate to people actually getting out to vote? The first thing I would say on this is that I'd say it's a real gift for Democrats in 3 states in particular, and they're important states. One, Michigan, where there was a 1931 law that's currently the law of the land that's basically banning pretty much all abortions. It's been put on hold by a court in Michigan at the moment. But nevertheless, Michigan's a very, very, very pro-choice state, and they've put on the ballot a petition to restrict anti-abortion laws. So there's a good reason for people to turn out to vote if they're worried about abortion in Michigan.
Yeah, there's a similar proposition in California,
yes,
which goes to show how these ballot initiatives are all about driving up turnout, because nobody thinks that a California legislature or governor is ever going to ban abortion or restrict abortion in the state of California. But put that on the ballot and people go, oh, gee, we better vote. And as a result of that, the Republicans could lose a couple of House seats in California because they're juicing Democrat turnout. So this is one of those issues that both sides see it can play to their advantage if they play it smart.
Totally. I was going to say there isn't a proposition in Wisconsin or Arizona, but both of them have ancient laws that are currently in place at the moment. An 1849 law for Wisconsin and an 1864 law for Arizona. And both of them have Republican legislatures. So it's very easy for Democrats to make the argument, if you want, we are never going to update this 1864 law unless we change the legislature. So people will come out to vote presumably for that. So that's a gift for Democrats in those 3 states at least. Apart from that, it's hard to know how this plays, to be honest. Like, because obviously, I mean, Republicans still care about abortion. The polls suggest that Democrats are more energised than Republicans, but how that translates to votes, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, well, it is fascinating that a state such as Michigan, which is a state that is traditionally more Democrat than it is Republican, but it is a battleground state at the presidential level. This is potentially a very, very good issue for the incumbent Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who is facing what looks to be a pretty comfortable re-election now. She's made a big issue of this, talking a lot about her daughters rather than herself, but this is also maybe a springboard for her into a presidential run in 2024 if Joe Biden doesn't run again. Gretchen Whitmer is definitely seen as being in that mix. So this has got major implications politically, no doubt. And in a sense, this is what the Republicans wanted from the Supreme Court, saying we're going to turn it over to the states. But this could be one of those careful what you wish for kinds of things, because if we find, in fact, that abortion is more popular than simply Democrats support it in states like Michigan, where there's 65% support in some polls for abortion in all or most cases, then if you make these elections about abortion, Republicans could be in real strife.
Something that Dobbs has done really well for Democrats is it's changed the debate from being, okay, this is what Republicans want to do, this is what Democrats want to do, to, okay, now we have a law of the land where some states have no exceptions for rape or incest. Like some states have incredibly restrictive laws. And it becomes about what the Republicans want to do, but not about what the Democrats want to do. Like Democrats, almost no Democrats are going on the record saying what they think the law should be. They just go, look at what the Republicans are doing.
Right.
And that's because of Dobbs.
Yeah.
It's changed the frame of the debate. And they're not going to get away with that forever, but they can get away with it up to November at the very least.
Yeah.
The Democrats are no longer the issue when it comes to this.
Right, they're not the ones promoting change. Change has happened, and they're now just criticising the change.
That's right. And I just want to say just two more quick things about this. First of all, we should just actually point out the polling is abysmal for pro-lifers on this at the moment. Once again, Dobbs changed the polling. At the moment, according to the New York Times, 62% oppose overturning Roe v. Wade versus 30%, and 90% support rape incest exceptions, including 81% Republicans, I might add. So when you scaremonger the rape incest example, and in a lot of states it is scaremongering because even Republicans don't want to have it in a lot of states. It works. It polls really badly. That's the first thing. And the second thing I'd say is something which just gets glossed over completely, which I want everyone to know because it is the most important part of this debate, in my view, which is we often hear about exceptions for the life of the mother. That is a complete furphy. Because the difference between America and Australia and Europe and all these other countries, the Americans like to talk about the time you can get an abortion, whether it's 16 weeks or 20 weeks. There are plenty of places around the world where you can only get an abortion after 15 weeks or 20 weeks. Like Australia, in some states, is one of those places. But in Australia and Europe and all around the rest of the world, you have exceptions for the health of the mother. Not the life of the mother, the health of the mother. And that's critical. Because...
Which also includes mental health as
Exactly. It means that there are many more opportunities. If someone needs to get an abortion for whatever reason, they can get an abortion. Whereas the life of the mother means even cancer patients are sitting there, this is literally happening in Texas right now, are sitting there not getting chemo because the doctors say, well, it will kill the baby and you're not about to die quite yet with your cancer. They need to wait till the mother is about to die before they give her chemo because they have to wait till the life is endangered. And that is a completely different situation. So if I was a Democrat, I'd make sure I got for the health of the mother exceptions wherever possible. And that would change the entire country.
All right, bit of malarkey before we go, Chaz.
That's a bunch of malarkey.
And if you thought Hillary Clinton's defeat in the 2016 presidential election was going to be the last time we're going to hear about her use of those private email servers, well, You would be wrong. While the FBI's investigation of the Clinton email affair helped to derail her presidential campaign, they found that her use of that private server as Secretary of State was careless, but that no reasonable prosecutor would bring such a case. Well, Clinton had turned over about 30,000 emails at that point, and a few of them were email chains containing references to information that was classified. But you can't actually put classified documents onto an unsecured email server. And Clinton or her staff deleted about 30,000 other emails. She claimed they were just personal emails about Chelsea's wedding plans at the time. But for years, of course, Donald Trump has been suggesting that there must be some really bad stuff in those ones that they deleted. And that's why he famously enlisted some help back in 2016.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
Well, this week the former president came up with a new theory. Maybe the raid on his home at Mar-a-Lago was the FBI really looking for Hillary's deleted emails. I kid you not.
There's also a lot of speculation because of what they did, the severity of the FBI coming and raiding Mar-a-Lago. Were they looking for the Hillary Clinton emails that were deleted, but they are around someplace? Were they looking for the spying on Trump's...
You're not saying you had it.
No, they may be saying, they may have thought that it was in there.
Okay.
Not even Sean Hannity was going to buy into that. Maybe because if Trump actually had any of Hillary's emails, and if any of them were classified, Trump himself would now be the one in legal jeopardy. Or maybe, Chaz, it's because it is clearly, absolutely unadulterated, harebrained malarkey.
It certainly is. Actually, did me tell you what he was talking about there? Because I actually think I know.
Yeah.
Because on the longer clip, if he keeps on going, he starts talking about Russiagate and stuff, and Russia. He just talks about random things.
Yes.
There was a conspiracy theory that was out about a week ago that when Trump declassified some of the Russiagate investigation documents, that really we never saw them, but they named Obama and Biden and Clinton as being behind it. And those documents got hidden, and Trump took them to keep them safe to make sure the Biden administration didn't destroy them. And the reason the FBI raided was because they wanted to get those documents so they could hide them so no one would ever see them.
So Trump is now taking an internet conspiracy theory and saying, oh yeah, that's probably what happened.
Yeah, like when Trump says something that just makes no sense at all, it's usually referring to some internet conspiracy theory that you haven't heard of. Because if there's one thing he knows about, it's internet conspiracy theories. He's an absolute expert at that. So I was just going to say one more thing about that's a hilarious note to go out on. But there's one little thing with the Hillary thing is it actually goes to what I was saying before about the intent thing. Because the reason she didn't get done, because they did find some classified information, right? The reason she didn't get done was because James Comey said we can't prove intent. We can't prove that she intended to smuggle out these documents and to dispose of them, etc. And I can so see the same arguments being used for Trump, even though. Let me say, they did not do the same thing. What Trump did was worse.
Yeah. References to information that is classified in an email chain involving several staff members is different to having boxes full of documents in your basement.
Let's make it very clear. What Trump did was definitely worse, but the question of intent is going to be the issue.
Sure, the law is the law, and that is Off the Planet for this week. We'll see you next Monday night, 9:35 p.m, right after Media Watch, for another edition of Planet America.
And we're going to have more extra bits here as well because we can't help ourselves. And by the way, don't forget, if this wasn't enough, if an extra wasn't enough, there is an extra to the extra.
What?
Which is the Pet Podcast.
Ah, yes.
Pet with Chaz and Dr. Dave, which you can see right now. We have a new edition every Friday. See you there.
Bye-bye.